to start. I hope all of you who are here are now coming to listen about internationalization and not just doing your emails, but it's okay to do your emails as well. My name is Riku Salminen. I work for Nokia in Tampere office in the developer.nokia.com. I'm a senior technical consultant, which means that I try to help people who have great ideas to have them come live as mobile applications in Nokia devices. And today I'm here to tell you about internationalization as a mindset. Basically, what I would like of all of you to take home from here is the idea that you'll be thinking international when you're coding. First of all, I don't know if you've seen this abbreviation. So internationalization is a long word, so it's abbreviated by taking all the letters from between and putting the number 18 there. Also, the one thing which is often mixed up is that internationalization is not the same as localization. So internationalization means designing an application so that it can be adapted to various languages and regions without engineering changes. And then localization is the process of translating the product into different languages or regions. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, internationalization, it's a mindset. It's not a technology. So it's the way you think about things when you're coding. Of course, you can have internationalization tools like automatic checkings in your code to see that you're using the correct locale data and you're not hard coding stuff. But okay, there's an example of one of the tools which is pseudo-localization. That title there, the internationalization, it's kind of pseudo-localized. So using characters from extended character sets. Of course, normally you would also add to the end of the word some characters so that it would appear longer. And this is for checking if all the characters are rendered correctly, but still can be tested by somebody who speaks English and not, let's say, Russian. So basically checking that it's ready for localization. So it's making your app localizable. Now, there are 10 rules of thumb that I like to call the 10 commandments. So first of all, as I said earlier, you have to leave room for translations. Using pseudo-localization is one way of testing that you have enough room. Of course, just visual testing on your application. If you have an OK button, in many languages, in most languages, OK it translates as OK. But I think in Spanish it can be aceptar, which is a bit longer. So if in your OK button you only have room for 2 letters, then that's not good. The other thing is to avoid concatenated strings. So what this means is that you have to avoid these things like smart coding, where you take pieces of strings and then you piece them together to make full sentences, because it doesn't work the same way in many languages. There's an example from Windows localization where I used to work, there's an example from Windows localization where in the Finnish version, if you run into an error, it tells you to report this. If you want to report this to target Microsoft or to target any vendor name, and this has been done because it's a concatenated string. But in the Finnish language, if you concatenate the name of the company at the end, you would have to have a suffix at the end of it. So therefore, there's a little bit silly translation in Finnish, but at least you get the word done. Then, to avoid reusing strings, disambiguation of strings. So, let's say the word read in English. It's spelled the same way as the word read, as in 16 messages, or the message has been read, or then let's say there's a button that you press to read a message. Even though it's the same in English, in many languages it's not. In Finnish it would be lue, and then to read as an imperative form. But then if something has been read in Finnish, that would be luettu. Or it's not the same word, and it's even longer. So in this case, two things that you have to have more room for it, and then it's a different word as well. Then fourth, you should keep your code and content separate. That means, in the case of Qt, this is something which is actually very well dealt with, because once you, in your code, you use the tr function, it means that then they are automatically separated when you do the translation preparation. But it's probably a good idea. I'll show you a very silly example that I made, where I have actually a different file for all my translations. And then in my code I only use basically macros or stuff like that. Then using locales and standards. So meaning that if you're showing a date format, well, okay, I'll show you an example again from Windows. There was a string to localize which looked like this. And this actually was the date format string. Instead of getting it from a locale, the localizer was supposed to just change these slashes here. In the case of Finnish, you would change them into dots, full stops. Well, that just doesn't work because the date order is different. Like my cousin was an exchange student in the United States. He got his driver's license there, but he's born the 8th of March. So when he came back to Finland and he wanted to get his Finnish driver's license, they told him that you can't get it because you're not 18 yet. It was so that, of course, it was the other way around. So he was already 18, but the Finnish officials thought that you still haven't had your birthday. So funny things like that can happen. But this was, of course, then circumvented by starting to use the locale. So there's a locale, which is a repository of all different things that you have regionally different between countries. So like the currency, the date formats, long and short date formats, even the thing where you group numbers by thousands, the numbering, the grouping symbol or character is different in some languages. So in Finnish, instead of I'm using Finland a lot because I'm Finnish. In Finnish, what we do is instead of a decimal point, we use a decimal comma, and as a thousand separator, we have a space. So there was a nice report from a tester once who said that there's a problem in your locale data for Finnish. You're missing the thousand separator. And we said, no, it's a space. I know, I can see a space there, but you haven't put in the thousand separators. No, it's there, it's space, it's invisible, you can't see it. I was like, okay, I don't think he ever understood what we were trying to explain, but at least it went through. Actually, I go back to the concatenated strings a bit with a nice example from earlier on. If you go to Windows, I'm using Windows a lot because I used to do localization for that. So if you go to Windows, there are more than one profiles in the same computer. You see the other guy's files. Let's say there was my colleague whose name was Hannes. So this guy's files, when I'm logged into the computer, they would show up in English as Hannes's files. The localization for this, the genitive form of the first name or of the username, is done so that there's let's say there's a user name, then plus, and like this. So we asked again the coders, like, okay, how am I supposed to localize that? It's like, well, it's easy. You use suffixes in Finland, right? So you just put the genitive form here, the genitive suffix. And we're like, yeah, that's the letter N. It's kind of easy. For me, my name ends in a vowel. So the genitive form from Riku, let's use a capital letter here, is Rikun. Okay, that's an N. So the genitive form for Riku is Rikun. Okay, works. Then we take my colleague's name, Hannes. Genitive form, Hanneksen. So, and an N. So, how do you do that? Do you have a database of all genitive forms of all Finnish names? What if they're not using a name as their username? So, instead of having let's say, Hannes's, I don't know if you use that in English, Hannes's files in English. When you look at it in the Finnish version, it says, okay, the word for file is tiedosto, which is a very long language, Finnish. So that's an S tiedostot, full stop, comma, and then Hannes. So we had to localize it like that. Then we can keep the word in the, what's that, the infinitive form or nominative form? So those kinds of things. If the person who was coding was thinking international in his head, he wouldn't done things like that. The funny thing was that some of the coders, many of the coders, are not English-speaking native speakers. But still, in many cases, you end up with code that can't be translated, can't be localized to the native language of whoever coded it. So it's a very hard thing. I do it myself. I've created like websites, and because I do a lot of widget stuff and web stuff. So I've done websites that I've noticed that I can't localize because I've done all the bad things that I'm telling you now what not to do. So it's not easy to always think international. Okay, one thing is don't have text in graphics. You maybe remember this in Windows. Any of you French? So I think it used to be so that in the Microsoft Office, somebody got this idea that you need to localize also the shortcut keys for bold and underline and italics. And for some time it used to be like that. I guess it's now B, U, and I for French as well, like you press Control B. But for some time in Microsoft Office, it was so that they were actually localized to French, and the French localizer needed to take the images as well, and then change those images that were in the toolbar, because there's the image of the letter U, and had to change that into the, I don't know what's underlined in French, but then basically had to redraw the whole thing. Now, you can do that as well, if you can do it smartly, so that you combine the text with the graphic in your code. So then you can have the text in the graphic as a separate localizable item. So that can work. Okay, another thing, you should enable reordering variables and arguments. So in the case of this one here, I was talking earlier about this date formatting string. So not only, as I said, it's okay only to change these into whatever you would use between dates and months, but it's also the same thing for these. I mean, if you don't have like first one and second one and third one, then the localizer can't change the place of those if they need to be in a different format. Of course, this is not something you would do. As I said, you should read it from the Locale data, but somebody has to code it in the Locale data as well. That's one. And in Qt, this is something that is easily done if you follow coding conventions. So this is like, in many cases, people might think that, okay, I have my own way of coding, and that's okay, of course. But if you're using some tools, or if you're doing some scripting that would enable you to test how well your code is internationalized, following coding conventions is one of the best ways of enabling using tools for testing. Then, number 9, comment on the source text. The pretty please there, that was actually given to me by our localization team in Tampere from Nokia. It's like, please at least tell people to always put some comments in the text. Because if you just see, earlier on we had this example of the word read. So you just have a string which says read. So okay, does it mean read or does it mean read? Is it in a button where I click on it, or is it like an information pop-up or something? This is really important for the localizer to be correctly localizing the word or the text string. Now you can see that I'm running out of space here. There's only 9 here, and I think the title says 10 rules of thumb. Yeah. So what's the 10th then? So I've been saying that a lot. So think international. Anybody who's not a native English speaker, coding in English usually, making the first version of the application at least in English. If you start while you're still in the planning phase, let's say like the UI design phase of your application, even the UI designer starts thinking in international ways. They leave room for translations on the UI, or then you make it adaptable somehow, that the space will get bigger if the strings are longer. Or you have automatic wrapping, or then something which is horrible, which is you have this thing where if your translation is too long, it will be cut, truncated, and the rest of the word is replaced by an ellipsis. Lots of those or then abbreviated words. This is in many long languages like Finnish and German. Some mobile devices are having a huge amount of abbreviations, and in some cases they are like there's a sentence of 4 words, each like shortened to 3 letters and a dot, and you can't understand anything what it means. So in that case, the UI designer wasn't like thinking international when they were designing the UI. Okay, so some examples of bad internationalization. There's I was actually telling about the French underline and bold and italics. So there's a nice example from the Italian version of Office, where underline in Italian is sottolineato, I think. Sorry for all the Italian speakers if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. So when they did the same for Italian, the underlining became S. So the shortcut for underline was Control S. Now that's quite universal for save. So what you ended up with was a big amount of unnecessary saves and none of the underlinings that you actually wanted. Or the other way around. Yeah, so here's a example that I already mentioned earlier. So report this to company name. Doesn't work because the company name needs to be in many languages conjugated so that it can't be in the nominative form. So it's still better to have it like that, where the variable is actually something that you can understand. So then this is almost okay for the localizer to do something with it. Of course, if it comes with a comment as well, then it will be easier still to put that report this to part of it okay, like I explained in the Finnish example. So this is not good. If it's a single bitmap image, then the other thing is, in many languages, there's like 2 things wrong with this button. One of them is that it's a bitmap only. So you need to make a new bitmap for another language. And the word go has only 2 characters. There's an exclamation point. In Spanish, you would have to put, I think, that exclamation point the other way around in the beginning of the word as well. So already, like, even if you were using the word go, you would still have to have more space for that. And I don't even know how I would translate that to Finnish, because we wouldn't have an expression like that in Finnish for just, go. I don't know, what would it be? Mene? But it doesn't sound right. Actually, in Finnish, I think we would just leave it as go, because everybody speaks English in Finland. And that's bad internationalization. So, this thing, your user is instructed to fill the date which you need in your form. Let's say it's a web form or your application, and you're asking, like, let's say for the birth date, something crucial bit of information maybe. And then you ask them to enter it like this, so that you get normative data in your application, so you can use that data. Okay, well, the thing is, for me as a Finn, when I think about dates, I think about day, month, year. A Swede would think about, I think it's year, month, date. It's even worse if you have like only 2 characters for year as well. So then you, like, if it's the 1st of, let's say January 2011, so then you'd have like a 01/01/11. Now, that can be 3 different dates. The thing is that for the user to input the date correctly, what you would then do is have a date picker component, so that the user can just go and select the date, and then in your application, you can show the date to the user in the user's own preferred date format by using Locale settings. And then in your code, you just save the date in any format, or in basically as a date object. So then you can use it properly. So good, what are those? Not assumptions, because I'll be talking about assuming things later on, but good internationalization means that the user doesn't have to think about it. It seems like obvious to them. So if you assume things, you make an ass out of you and me, and that's a donkey, not the other kind of an ass. There's an example of bad internationalization that we as Nokia did. There's the Symbian Smart Installer that makes sure that you get all the cute packages in your device. It checks if you don't have the correct packages, and it goes and downloads them. Now, there's a normalizing function there that makes all the extensions to file names all capitals. So that's kind of nice. Then it's easy to compare what's on your file system, and then so the sys file for the installation package for Symbian, it's SIS. So they were using incorrectly at this time a locale aware function for doing the capitalization of SIS. In Turkey, what happened, that all Smart Installer installations failed. Well, not all, but most of them, because the lowercase letter I with a dot in Turkey turns into a uppercase letter I with a dot. So it of course couldn't find any capital letter I with dot S files in the file system, because there aren't any. So some examples of good internationalization, of course, from Qt. So earlier I was giving you that example of not being able to reorder the parameters or arguments or variables in your string. So in this case, you can, because they are just 1 and 2 and 3. So I think I lost the mic now. Okay. So you can then take the 3 and put it in the front, like as the first argument, if your language needs that. Then another one, the date format again. Even though this is a bad example, because you shouldn't do this, you should read it from the locale. So it's not easy like that. And then the local downgrade path. So this thing here, that's the Finnish-Swedish language. So that's like the Swedish language in Finland. Because there's it's the second official language of Finland is Swedish. So that locale there tells you that it's the Swedish language as spoken in Finland, and your region is Finland. If you start looking for translation files for Finnish-Swedish, you can't find them. So then maybe next you try if you have Swedish without any language. That you could actually even see if you then have Swedish files for Sweden. And then if you don't find those, then you could like settle for Finnish, because almost everybody who speaks Swedish in Finland also speaks Finnish. And if you can't find that, then take English. And not having like a default where you always default to English, because in some areas it could be that you have a more commonly understood other language than the actual local language. So let's say that in India you might check for Marathi. If you can't find Marathi, then maybe you first try if there's Hindi, and then if there's even no Hindi, then you can try the English. That dialogue there for selecting region. So that in some areas, the thing about there which is internationalized is the word region. Because if you call those regions, well, let's say Taiwan, for example, you shouldn't call it a country in some places, because it's not considered like a country at some places. Then your application might get rejected by the local market, because they're saying like you can't do that. And these examples of images where you don't have any text in them are easily understood by everybody. Okay, so now it's demo time. So let's see if I can make this happen. So here I told you about this. First of all, I have to fake it, because of course my locale is Finnish. So I told you that I have this silly application. Silly in a way that I've made this. There's my main QML file. So instead of having the translations there, I made a function. I'm not saying that you should do it like this, but this is just a weird example of it. So here's something that is then very nice for the localizer. Localizer where you actually have some information for the localizer. Then you're returning a string here, and you don't have to ever touch your actual code. So what happens here is that then, let's see if I run this now, it will hopefully run. So there we go. So this is what it looks like. This is taken from I think the movie Mask, not the one with Jim Carrey, but an earlier one where there's this disfigured boy, and he that sun shining on my face stuff is from there. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie. I thought it was a good movie, so I stole those lines from there. But the things that I enjoy and I don't like, those are mine. So beer and eating exotic foods and haters that hate. Okay, and being always late is something which is really bad for me as well. So that's now in English. So what I would do from here, first of all, in my project file, because this being cute quick, in my project files I might need to define some files that are search for translation strings. So this here tells Qt that this string needs to be, this is a translatable item here. When I would run from here, the update translations, I would get these files. So I put these files in a folder just to make it easier for me. So I get a file like this. I've made one for Finnish, all by myself, and in here, this is what it looks like. So it's the TS file, which is a translation file. It's in Qt. What we do is we have only like a language pair, so you would only have like English and Finnish, like source and target language in there, and it's a very commonly understood format by many localization tools. One of which is the Qt linguist. So I would then send this file. Sorry, I would send this file to a translation agency to localize, and this is what the localizer would then see. Okay, you have here. I'm not going to translate the whole thing here, but let's say there's things that I enjoy. So I'd go asioita, joista pidän. So that's a lesson in Finnish. And then if I go Control and Enter, I get the next one. So very easy. In my case, I have a serious design flaw in my application. I don't know if you noticed already when we were looking at the English version of it, but the text was pretty big and there wasn't a lot of room on the display. So to show you what I actually mean with all this thinking international, I have purposefully done bad internationalization in my application. So now if I go here and I fake Finland and run this again. So I've done from my Qt linguist, I've done then the release from here, just to avoid blue screens and demo effects. Of course, Qt Creator is a great tool; it won't crash ever. But just in case, I'm not doing it now. But it makes this binary file, which is then used at runtime by Qt to get localizations. And I was talking about the language downgrade path. So what Qt actually does, it first, if you're Locale, if I were to use this here, this function here, to actually query the Locale from the system, I would get fi underscore capital Fi, which is Finnish in Finland. Now Qt will first look for a file which is named something .fi underscore fi. Can't find it. Then it will go and look for fi only, which is what we have. So hopefully now, when we run this application again, we will see the result of bad internationalization happening in the screen. So just a moment. There we go. So the word beer, yeah, that works. But and both of the titles, they kind of like fit there. But as a localizer, when I was translating it, I didn't have any information on how much space I have. Of course, this could be done by just sending the whole project to the localizer. But usually, in many cases, localizers, even though the translators who do the work are, in many cases, code savvy, but in even more cases, they are not. So it means that for them to have the same tools that you have and have the same projects, and then they would actually run it or test it in an, it could be that the application is still not even working when you're already sending your files to localization, so they couldn't even run it. They might see pictures. That's always a good, like, take screenshots. If you're sending stuff to be localized, even fake screenshots or your UI designs, if you have them, they help the localizer a lot. I didn't have, as a localizer, any information from myself as a coder, so I ended up with stuff like this, which doesn't fit on the screen. So I would now go and change it, which I won't do, because we'll run out of time. There are other things that the Qt linguist, which is a good tool, of course, as coders, you wouldn't be doing the translation. But just to show you, it checks also, let's say I go So I'm adding an exclamation point, and immediately I get a warning that it doesn't end with the same punctuation. So if I forget to add a full stop in a place where it should be, the cute linguist will tell me that now you forgot about that. If I don't have the same parameters here, so let's say I would have like I would have this there, it will tell me that it doesn't have the same place markers as in the source text, because the source text doesn't have a place marker or an argument there at all. So it's a very good tool. So translation agencies, unfortunately, in many cases, use their own tools. They would be then getting your TS files. All the translation agencies understand TS files. In too many cases, people actually send localized stuff to be localized as Excel sheets, which is hard for everybody, because then when the coder gets the stuff back, you need to manually copy-paste it or input it there, and then Excel does stuff to your strings, like using smart quotes and stuff like that. When I don't know if you ever copy-pasted stuff from Excel to your code, but usually it just doesn't compile anymore. So using localization tools is a good idea. I guess that is it from my part. The thing that I hopefully managed to tell you now is that when you are coding, just think international always. So that keep it in your head that I want to have the bigger reach of a localized application. I want to be able to sell my stuff in China, because there's a lot of Chinese people. So maybe I want to localize it to Chinese. So if you start thinking about it while you're designing your application, then you have a win-win situation there, because not only is it easier for you to add the translations and even more languages, it's also a good opportunity for you to get more money, because you have more markets available. So now it's time for questions. If you have any specific, very technical questions, I think it's not the place to talk about them here, but I'll be there upstairs in the Qt lab, so you can come and ask them there. There we have one.
So there is a rather common situation when you have installed an application on a desktop and it uses your local language. It might be Finnish, it might be Swedish, what's more. Then your colleague or your friend comes to the computer and he doesn't speak Swedish or Finnish, so he needs to change the language somehow.
Yeah.
Or even you need to change the language somehow in order to Google some warnings or mistakes or what's more,
Yeah.
the interface. But the problem is that if your application is in Finnish, all the menus and all the labels, all the buttons are in Finnish either.
Yeah.
So it's a rather complicated task to change the language. So what's the silver bullet here according to maybe your experience? Thank you.
Yeah, that was actually the two good things in your question. One of them is that, of course, in your application, if you somehow enable local independent language switching, so let's say that you have those two languages, you have Finnish and then English, then of course you can do it so that that you read in other translation files as well. Now, changing the language at runtime, if you have dynamic widths to your dialogues and all that, it usually requires like not a reboot of the machine, but like at least you have to close the application and start it again. But it's quite dependent on your application what it's like. But the other thing which was we can try to figure out like a technical solution for that one later on. But then the other question that you had there was that, okay, you're on somebody else's computer and the language is different. What about making assumptions in your application about in which language the person wants to see the, let's say, web page? So any one of you tried Googling here? So I get that, like the German answers first. and I go automatically to google.de. I mean, my UI language is Finnish, and then I am in Germany, and for some reason I'm offered German content just because I'm in Germany. I don't understand German, so I wouldn't like to have that. In many cases, if you go to a web page and based on your IP address, you decide to show, let's say, Portuguese. If you're in Sao Paulo on a business trip and you try to go to a website and it shows it to you in Portuguese, and you don't even have a way there to switch the language, then it's kind of like it's not a good user experience. So again, that was back to the slide where I had the picture of the donkey. So if you're making assumptions, if you assume things, then you're making an ass out of you and me. Me being here the user and getting a bad user experience. So do we have other questions there?
Is it true that Qt Linguist is going to be deprecated for Qt 5? And if so, what would be the mechanism to use in its place in the future?
I'm not sure about that, so I can find out for you. But one thing is that, as I said earlier, all the localization agencies will always be using their own tools, in many cases developed in-house. The good thing is that as a coder you don't have to care. The methods for updating your translation files and then getting the released files, I mean generating the binary files that you use at runtime, they are in Qt Creator and not in Linguist. Well, they are in Linguist as well, but still. What you need to do is to just generate those TS files, which is done automatically by Qt, and send them to a black box called localization agency, or then use some very nice crowdsourcing applications, of which there are some, and these all would understand the TS formatted files. So it's a general standardized format for translation files, so we don't really have to care what the localization agency is using. Once, as long as we are using TS files to send them. I hope that answered your question. But to the actual question, if it's going to be deprecated or not, I actually don't have the answer, but I can get it for you. There's one.
All right, well, maybe that's more of a design question about localization and internationalization. But just imagine you've got an application or website, community-driven website or application, and you get user-generated content. If you localize your application in many languages, then you're going to have kind of a segmentation of the community based on their languages.
Yeah.
And if I'm French, which I am, and I'm going to see like maybe Portuguese content, and I don't speak Portuguese, how can I, well, make things better for the users?
In case of communities, the way to localize them is usually crowdsourcing. Of course, you can source stuff in-house or the actual company providing the community portal, like let's say Facebook does that. I have localized a lot of Facebook myself because there's also a rating system used in Facebook, so where people who use it in another language can say that is this a good translation or not. So I'd say that in cases of community sites, I would be using crowdsourcing for the translation, because there will be a huge amount of content. Now that the fact that if you go to a site and you see Portuguese there, then of course there are tools of adding automatic translations, like
like Google Translate.
Yeah, stuff like that on your page, like Google Translate or something. Many websites and content management systems actually have enabled it, but that's something that you should actually keep in mind, that the automatic translations are not like real localization. In many cases, if it's a long sentence, I mean a long piece of text, you can actually probably make sense of the general idea that they're having, but you can't auto-translate a poem, let's say. Or if it's a very short string, like let's say one sentence or even one word, it can have many different meanings. The example of the word read, or is it read or is it read? then Google Translate obviously doesn't know that, but it will offer you something based on some fuzzy logic that it uses. So that's why I say that using crowdsourcing for creating translations for the UI is something that you can do. Now, for the content, you either have to learn a new language, or then somebody has to rewrite it, or then you can use some automated things, but then always with a caveat that it might not be exactly what whoever wrote it meant. Was there another?
Yeah, another question.
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. You've just demonstrated how the Finnish translation exceeded the screen.
Yeah.
Does the Qt linguist offer any possibility to limit the translation string, so say just 20 characters, so that it doesn't happen?
The best way, first of all, character is not a good measure, because we are using a proportional font in most cases, and not Courier, which is unproportioned, where every character is the same width. So in some language you might have a lot more letters, but the word could still be shorter, because many of the letters would be like I's and L's and not M's and O's. But to the actual question that limiting it, it's one of the good ideas as a designer is to, of course, first give it enough space, as I didn't in my example. But then the other thing is that you have those comments there. Of course, there can be automated things where you actually can show what's in your translation. Like when you're making your translation, you can actually show that it's where it's going to be in the end result. But in those cases where your application is not ready, then it's very hard. So commenting on them, that the pretty please comment your text files. You can say in your comment to the translator that very limited amount of space, don't exceed the source language by more than 20% or something like that. So that's the kind of a fail-safe way of doing it.
Hello. I'm not sure if this is too technical, but there's probably still technical limitations today. So in first instance, you think you have a nice Unicode system and you have a very common font, but then we found that in some Windows distributions, some local Windows versions, some characters are missing. They're just not implemented in that font. Can you give some hints what we have to watch, especially together with Qt, not to run into such issues?
Well, of course, if you have your own font, then it's easy, because you just design your font so that it has all the characters. But then there's quite a lot of characters in all languages. So I'd say that testing is the only way of doing it. So there's the example of pseudo localization that I showed you, where you would test for characters that they are actually rendered correctly in your application. So testing is the only way of making it sure. Then of course, relying on Windows to have in like the default fonts, Windows actually handles it quite nice. So you very seldom see boxes or question marks, because it can take the characters from the default font if it doesn't find it in the actual font, which is set by the application in some cases at least. But I think using just testing to ensure that it displays correctly. So there's no like how would I say it? There's no easy way out in this case. Was there a question from there? Don't make it too difficult.
No. It was partially answered already.
Okay.
Sorry, Riku, I was late.
No worries.
Still, any suggestions regarding the fitting the long words into the precise space? Because our three biggest problems is like when we do translations to like 20 to 40 languages, if word doesn't fit, we have the trying to be smart and downscale the size of the font,
Yeah.
so it will fit. But for example, in Indonesian and Philippines, we are facing problems where word is becoming unreadable because the font is becoming small.
Yeah.
So we have to break the word. And the problem is that we have no idea how to correctly break the word so that it will go to another line. Is
Yeah.
there any words of wisdom except testing? Because we have to then take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of screenshots, send it back to translation agency. They charge us more than for actual translation, just for the proofreading.
The one thing is, of course, that you can use, like Unicode is good in that way that you can use kind of hidden, now what's the, now I forgot the name of it, but the slash that when you cut a word, what do you call that? Anyway, so you can have it as hidden. So then your instructions to the translator at the first round would be that might be cut to the next line. So please add those marks in the string. Now the problem is that not all languages actually allow cutting words. The hyphenation, that's the word, hyphen, yeah. So not all languages actually do that. And in some languages there are no rules. So you can just cut it anywhere. One good option that I've seen in those cases where you don't want to actually cut words to the next line because you only have this one line on your UI, one good option is to scroll it once so that the user has time to read it and really understand what it is, and then truncate it with an ellipsis or something. But that's of course always kind of like hacking type of thing. But to correctly hyphenate the word and avoid using libraries for that, which would then be like proofreading libraries and like big database of words correctly hyphenated already. It would be for the translators to add the conditional hyphen in those places where the word will be cut.
Thanks.
But I guess we don't have any questions. I don't see any hands up. Okay, so then again, thank you very much. And if you have